Welcome back, everyone. Let's now switch gears. The law that superintends our elections is the Electoral Act. After the existing one was repealed as a result of a critical review in 2010, it was named or renamed as the 2010 Electoral Act as amended. After a series of elections, a few gaps have been seen. You remember in the Kogi election scenario, when the APC candidate died, there wasn't provision, they call it lacuna, in the law as to what could be done in that situation in the middle of an election when results have not been determined just yet. That's just one case in point. The law has been amended. Several issues have been pointed out. But on 4 different occasions, now the amended bill has gone to the president's desk but has not been signed. The president has his explanation for not signing. But there have been queries on why he wouldn't sign. Tonight, we shall be dissecting the issues. Joining me to look at some of these issues are informed and educated member of the civil society and the president's advisor. Joining me is an election observer, Mr. Abiodun Ajijola. He's a national coordinator of Election Monitor. And also Mr. Nwankwo, very popular in the issues of constitutional development in Nigeria. He is the co-convener of Civil Society Election Situation Room. He joins me here in our Lagos studio. Also in our Abuja studio is the President Senior Special Assistant on Legislative Matters, Senator Enang, who joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you.
It's a critical one, isn't it, Mr. Nwankwo and Mr. Ajijola? Let's take a look at some of the issues that will premise our conversation tonight. Abiodun Ajijola is joining me right here on the screen to look at some of the issues that we need to be focusing on and perhaps a background on what has happened so far. There's a history. Let's take a look at the timeline quickly.
Okay.
There's a history on this issue of Electoral Act amendment when the National Assembly sat on this bill and they were putting it together. Give us a sense of how, okay, so we have 4 versions, isn't it? So there is a first version which had 43 clauses transmitted on the 19th of January 2018 and rejected on March 8, 2018. What was the major problem here?
Yeah, the major problem here was the sequencing of the elections. As you know, we do have a system whereby we go from the National Assembly elections and the presidential together to the State House of Assembly and governorship. Although, at a time in the past, it has also been the other way. So I think the issue came up because the National Assembly, led by the House of Representatives, I have to specifically state, because as of the 30th of March 2017, the Senate had passed its own first version of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill and did not include resequencing. It was the House of Representatives that introduced this on the 1st of February in 2018. And then when the conference committee was set up, the Senate concurred. And of course, at that point, I expected that everybody knew it was controversial. And eventually, I think for that primary reason, the president rejected it. But also there was the issue of legislating issues concerning local government elections, which, as you know, is not conducted by INEC. They are conducted by local state governments. And then the state houses of assembly have their own laws as well. So I think those were the major issues at the beginning.
Okay,
yeah.
That's the first version.
Yeah.
Like I said, for our viewers who want to know how these have been going on for some time now, there is the second version. It had 41 clauses. It was transmitted on the 27th of June 2018, rejected due to drafting errors. This is a major one. When the president said, look, take this back, there are drafting errors here. Yeah. There's someone to blame for that, isn't it?
Yeah, because why this is very critical, some people feel that, well, what are drafting errors? But you have to remember that this is a law, right? And it is a law that has a principal act. That is an act that exists before this amendment. Therefore, whatever amendment you are making in this current amendment must tally or must mesh, harmoniously with what is existing in the principal act. So if you make an amendment today in the bill that will create an impossibility to implement, like some other areas which I would like to discuss later, that you will discover that it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to implement the act if it goes that way. Right. So these are issues that need to be addressed before the bill can be passed.
Because there is the drafting issues also came in the third version.
Again, yeah.
In the third version, there is the issue of drafting errors also, yeah, and cross-referencing errors. Yeah. Let me bring in Mr. Nwankwo here. What does this mean for the drafters of our law when you drafted law and the third time, they see the same issues of drafting and error issue?
Well, certainly, it goes back to the whole issue of lawmaking. The National Assembly, the legislature has the responsibility, three responsibilities: lawmaking, oversight, and representation. Now, lawmaking means that they either initiate the laws themselves or they receive laws. And the challenge we have is that you have a National Assembly that is not mostly made up of lawyers. Most of them are not lawyers. So you bring them and you ask them to begin from the scratch to draft laws. And that's a challenge. This country cannot go forward. And no country goes forward if the executive, which is responsible for running a government, does not take the initiative of drafting laws. And that's why you have departments of government that should draft laws. This regime has one of the worst records in terms of proposing legislation. But that does not excuse the fact that certainly there were errors. And I don't blame the president who refused to assent, not on the first occasion. The third occasion arose because there were transmission difficulties. In the first and second issues, it was political, dealing with the issue of sequencing of elections, and then subsequently, given the back and forth, the errors arose. So originally, these errors were not there. Now, the politics now meant that the executive and the legislature began a tussle between themselves. And whether it is the House of Representatives or the Senate that put forward a bill, both houses are acting in unison. The Senate may have forgotten to put something, and then it initiates that in the House and asks the House to insert it. So basically, it's one National Assembly working on the same agenda and working to deliver on an electoral law for the country, with an executive that has not developed the initiative of proposing legislation to the National Assembly. And it's not just on the Electoral Act, it's across all of the issues of governance in this country.
Are we seeing a situation, a political situation, where perhaps the executive is foot dragging on this law?
Well, as it is
correct
now,
me if I'm wrong, sorry, that there seems to be, there should be some kind of synergy between the legislature and the executive when a law is being drafted. I mean, for you to have seen a situation where the second and the third time, the law is being fingered for drafting errors. Is there a lacuna? Is there a relationship problem between the both organs?
I make the point again. The executive has responsibility for executing and governing, executing laws, governing the country. So laws should emanate from the executive almost on all occasions. The legislature's role in drafting legislation actually is minimal in most democracies. Its role is receive the bill from the executive and pass it into law. And on some rare occasions, propose legislation, especially where there is consensus in the legislature on it. Now, what we have seen is a failure on the part of the executive to drive legislation. Now, on the last bill that was sent, there was, I would even say, consensus, because you had representatives of the executive and the legislature and experts sitting and finalizing and addressing all the issues. Every single thing the president raised was addressed in the final bill that was transmitted to the president in November, including INEC was in the works with the legislature to come to this. So what we have that was sent from the National Assembly to the president was a consensus bill that everybody agreed. Now, I don't believe that the president will not sign this bill. I will be surprised if he doesn't sign it.
And that's the fourth version. If you show us the fourth version of that bill, okay, so it was prepared by the joint, like you said, on 18th September, was passed on the 23rd of October, Senate on 24th of October 2018 by the Federal House of Representatives, was now not transmitted to the president until 8th of November 2018. So for almost a month now, that bill has been on the president's desk. So this version is still with the president and has until the 8th of December 2018 to either assent or to reject it. Do you think he will reject or assent it?
I think he will assent to it, but you know, the presidential advisor is on the other side. I think he will assent to it. I would be surprised if he doesn't assent to it. There's nothing. If you look at that bill, there is no controversy right from the beginning section to the end.
Okay.
Indeed, the president and the presidential advisor have all said that the issue of smart card readers is something that they all agree with. So, quite frankly, there's nothing in that bill that is controversial as far as I can see that would make the president refuse to sign it. So I expect that before the expiration of the 30 days that he's required to, that he will assent to the bill.
Since the Senator Enang is here with us on the program, so Senator Enang, thank you for coming on the show. Weighing on this matter, we've been breaking it down to looking at some of the remote causes of the back and forth. 4 times now. It's suspect, isn't it, from the perspective of some analysts who think the real reason behind the president not signing this on 4 different occasions. Well, hopefully he will sign on the 4th occasion.
Well, thank you very much, and let me appreciate my colleague, my friend, Nwankwo in the Lagos studio. And I want to say that Mr. President has not withheld assent to this bill. Mr. President is still considering this bill within the law and the provisions of the Constitution. The legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the legislative historians will recall that this is one of the bills that if it is not given the greatest of consideration, and if the president and our team did not do great job of scrutiny, we would have run our electoral process into trouble. You recall that this is the 4th time that the bill has been sent to Mr. President, and it was the dexterity of Mr. President in looking and causing all persons and institutions which ought to make input on this bill to look and see whether there has been any reason to withhold assent. And Mr. President, because in an electoral act, also did take personal interest in each and every of the provisions. Therefore, it was in the course of it that each of these problems that were discovered, and it was remitted back to the National Assembly for reconsideration, and Mr. President withheld assent. But as Mr. Nwankwo and the Nigerians are aware, the bill was on the desk of the President from on or about the 8th of November. Mr. President is still within time allowed by law to consider that bill.
Okay. Sorry, let me pause you for a moment. Sorry, Senator Enang.
I was in court at the Supreme Court.
Hold on for a moment. We need to take a short break. We'll take a break, another one, and when we return, we continue our conversation, educated and informed opinions on the Electoral Act amendment and whether or not the president's decision poses a danger to the 2019 election. We dissect these issues when we return from this break, everyone. Join us again.